a lot of my work deals with and addresses issues of leadership and change at every level in education, from a school to an entire country, and more recently extending these ideas to working with organisations in business and also sport. In 2006 I wrote a book with my colleague and friend Dean Fink called Sustainable Leadership, and here we, drawing on the environmental literature and the corporate literature and the biological literature on biodiversity, we tried to address through the research we'd done 7 principles of sustainable leadership. Leadership that has depth and has a clear moral purpose and focus. Leadership that lasts and endures over time, from one leader to the next, in the long term as well as in the short term, and seeing the relationship between the two. Leadership that has breadth, that includes the many and isn't just about the heroic actions of the one or the few. Leadership that is about social justice, so what you do in one place you do with full awareness of how it affects people in other places. Leadership that embraces the principles of diversity, understanding that standardization destroys ecosystems and organizations, and embracing diversity of species, diversity of people, diversity and ideas of teams strengthens our organizations. These are just 5 of the 7 principles of sustainable leadership that help us understand how things fit together as the end of what we're trying to achieve and as the means of how we're trying to achieve them. Following this, my colleague at Boston College and friend also, Dennis Shirley, and I really set about trying to understand how in education strategies of bringing about change had themselves changed over time, over 3 or 4 decades. And then we looked at these as 3 different ways of change. The innovation but inconsistency of the 1960s and 70s, lots of good ideas but really no means to pull them together. The strategies of force, pressure and competition of the Reagan era that created energy and a sense of urgency, but because of the excessive force and pressure created a lot of fallout in terms of people who no longer wanted to work in organizations where all their actions were micromanaged, through to a third way, the way of Clinton, the way of Blair in England, which tried not to feel that the private sector could solve everything or the public sector could solve everything, but some combination of market and state, private and public. Now we're moving beyond that to a fourth way of change, not just in education but in other organizations. And here Dennis Shirley and I have focused on highly successful practice from around the world. The #1 high-performing country in education, Finland, which we've evaluated for the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. The #2 jurisdiction that falls just behind Finland, Alberta, which seems its opposite. 39 years of conservative republic government in an oil-rich economy, but that has many of the same principles as Finland in its core practices. And here, what we see in these jurisdictions is a fourth way where at the center of what we want to be is not being #1 or even having vaguely world-class standards, but a strong dream of what we want to be and how we want to achieve it. From places like these and from the work we're doing in sporting organizations that perform above expectations and businesses that perform above expectations, we're grasping the core principles of what a a fourth way looks like. An inspiring and inclusive vision or dream. The capacity of organisations to work with their communities and involve them in what they are doing. The ability to use data but not to be driven by it, rather to use it as a basis for inquiry as communities together in how organisations can improve. The recognition that organisations need to work together for a common good, that the strong should help the weak, and sometimes even that you can achieve more by collaborating with your competitors in what the literature understands as co-opetition than actually always working ruthlessly against them over time. These are some of the ideas and the research and the insight that I'll try and explore with you at this conference, which magnificently is not just about the corporate world and not only about the public sector, but tries to bring different sectors together, private and public, non-profit and conventional state, to explore ways where we take on the biggest problems and challenges of our society in this century and see how in a big picture we can figure out ways all to work together to solve them as a common end and as a set of inspiring means to bring them about over time. I look forward to working with you at the conference.